different experiences can differentiate based on background and culture.
Yeah, and that actually is really, really valuable. Nancy Barron is Chicana, and Nancy Grimm is very white, and they both have the same goals, but they see the world so differently because of their experiences. And it's easy for us to overlook the fact that the world we see is different than the world somebody else sees. Um, Somebody else who's read at least the beginning. Anna, what were your first impressions?
I thought it was very interesting, and while it was an academic writing, I was much more entertained by this one than I was by the Teresa Tony one, just because I could relate to it, and I found it took me like a long time to get through the text because I found myself stopping and like having like talking like thinking how it like applied to me in my life and the way I see things. And so it was very applicable, even though it was written like 20 years ago. And like I could point out the places where like, oh, this has changed now, or like, oh, this is still very similar, kind of thing.
Yeah, lots and lots of talking back to the text. I printed out my copy because I love writing in the margins, and to me that's helpful to have it. To me, it's really helpful to do that. And when I go back over it, which by the way, your first essay is going to be connected to this one in some form. And so you may want to print this out too and do the talking back, like Anna said. Other first impressions, somebody else. I can't remember. Oh, go ahead.
For me, well, I just really appreciated having the two perspectives, because sometimes I need to like reread what they were saying, because they share the same ideas, but obviously from their own perspective. But for me, that helped in establishing what they're trying to say with each section, because I was getting a little confused sometimes just with the academic writing. It was kind of hard for me to understand some parts.
Yeah, it's hard to keep in mind, like there's so much story in this. The epigraph at the beginning talks about how narrative tells, narrative reveals things that we might not think to explain. And it gives voice to things that we might not hear. And so that this is filled with narratives. The introduction is a narrative, and then each of the Nancys give their own narratives, and narratives from other people too. And I found the narratives really moving and thought-provoking, and yet it's still academic writing. It's academic writing filled with narratives. Tuan, I think you said you had read this also, or at least part of it.
Yeah, I read the first half.
First impressions.
It was kind of interesting. It's like when she was going through like the story with like the student in the writing center being like really confident in her work, but not confident in like displaying it. It was like kind of like opposite to like my kind of philosophy and just way of thinking. If I'm proud of something that I'm going to do, I'm just going to like display it no matter what. So there's like a kind of clash of like thoughts there, I guess. But I thought it was really interesting to see like how everything played out from like a 2002 point of view.
Yeah, I definitely understand that student's perspective. This is the young African American writing center coach who was coming in, and she was working with Nancy Barron, her mentor, and she had all these points of view based on being an African American woman in a largely white university. It's in Michigan, this university. But she didn't want her point of view to come through because everybody would know it was her, because she would have been the only African American. in there. And so she was cautious. So she was writing the white ideas that she thought would be accepted. And I think that that kind of raises a question of how much has that changed since 2002. And those are some of the questions that I want to address today. The other thing is this, Anna touched on this, how different this journal article is from Tony's. And yet it has similarities, like it's, so what are the similarities and what are the differences for those of you who have read at least part of this?
I think,
Sorry, go ahead.
no problem. I think one of the bigger differences is how one is jam-packed with all of those citations and references, while this one, it still includes it, but it's not the dominant form of which they convey information. It includes more personal analysis that still has that academic hint to it, but it's more driven with like personal critical analysis rather than interpreting what other people have said and really like developing off of it. I feel like I could have said that better, but it's more like their own words rather than using other people's words and then combining the two.
Yeah, it's not just theory based, it's actual action based. And so they're relaying what's happening, not just what somebody said about it. Roxanne.
Yeah, so I was kind of going to say the same thing, but actually saying that it's similar, how they both use citations from different sources. And then I was also going to say that they both kind of split it up into sections. So like the other one had, I think, like 7 or 8, and then this one had like 4 different sections.
Yeah, so many, there are lots of sections. Tony divided hers up into conventions of academic writing, and Barron and Grimm divided theirs into the lessons that they learned. And so, like the organization from that perspective is actually pretty similar. Anybody else, things that you saw that were similar or different?
Me, I haven't actually read the article, so I'm going off of like the very first paragraph that I went over Monday. But I remember like the one big thing that jumped out to me was like how explicit it was, and how it was just like, so it very obviously said what it wants to do while also being like more narrative based. So that like that's a similarity between the Nancy's and Tony, was that they're both very explicitly saying what they want to do.
Yeah, it's super similar. They're both very direct, and you'll see an explicit argument statement in this paper. And I think it's important to note those explicit claims and also the citations. The citations are actually pretty powerful. And those of you who have read this, what appeals do you see the authors using? Anna, what appeals do you see them using?
I like looking at the paper right now to see like which one. They're providing examples that they then analyze. So exemplification, I guess, like examples of how they tried to put these theories into practice, and then what worked and what didn't, and they're analyzing their examples. we talked about narration already, and then they use some rhetorical questions sometimes in the text, like these are questions that we thought like going into this, like these are questions we were asking about, like when the section where they first talked about introducing the historical text from a different perspective to their students. They had a list of questions of like, is this going to do this? Is this going to do this? And then it like revealed to you what exactly, like the answers to those questions. Like, no, it didn't answer the questions the way we thought it would. It answered in a different way, kind of thing.
Yeah. So those are some common rhetorical strategies we see over and over and over again. Every narrative serves as an example. Every narrative illustrates a claim. Where do we see ethos in this essay?
I think what like primarily builds their ethos, their credibility in the journal article, for me, I thought was just their experiences, showing that this is like firsthand, that they have witnessed this. I think contributed a lot to like their argument being valid and they knew what they were talking about.
I agree, Amaru, and I think that they start building that where they share their identities right at the beginning. And so they have this transparency. Here's who I am. When Barron shares her story of encountering the young man who was a writing center tutor who said he hated Native Americans, and she shares her frustration and how she shut down, especially since she is she's Indigenous, her background is Indigenous herself. And so she's shutting down, like her honesty with how angry she was at him and how she didn't even want to interact with him shows her transparency and her honesty, and it builds her credibility. It's pretty powerful. Or when Nancy Grimm shares how frustrated she was with tutors who didn't really want to engage with this process. Again, we get that honesty and transparency, and it's their responses in part that build the ethos because they're appealing to the frustration, particularly in 2002, how hard this would be for writing center directors to have these conversations. Do we see any pathos in this essay? We didn't in Teresa Tony at all, but do we see pathos here?
Yeah, I was gonna ask if then like all the narratives that kind of evoke these emotions in them that could be reflecting the audience, could that be an appeal to pathos as well?
Yeah, did you feel emotions when you were reading?
Yeah, I definitely felt that I did. At least like reading some of the more like that more dramatic experience with that man, I could almost feel like the intensity of it when I was reading it.
Yes, so could I. And I think that was their intention. Sometimes we get caught up in, particularly in academic writing, we get caught up in that ethos and logos are the deal. And with writing center literature, there are often, I don't even know how to talk today. There are a lot of narratives that evoke emotions. Because writing center literature, although it has to be founded in evidence, it also is illustrated in actually interacting with people. We learn a lot from stories, as the epigraph notes. And just as life notes, we learn from our experiences. And so I think that this is important to remember as we're doing that. In fact, it evokes emotions, and they're intentionally doing this because they assume some things about their audience. They assume that their audience values equality. They assume their audience of writing center directors and possibly writing center tutors value diversity. They assume that they have encountered difficult conversations about diversity. And so they're assuming a lot of their audience. And that's why these stories have the propensity, the tendency to evoke emotions. Let me ask you another question, because this article is super, super old. It's almost 20 years old, written in 2002. What is the value of reading this in 2020? Actually, any of you can join in this conversation, even if you haven't read this essay yet. What might be the value of learning about an early diversity conversation in writing center literature?
One idea I have is that we can read it and then compare it to like current days like conversation on it, because our essay is supposed to look at the current conversation and add to it, so we can see what the conversation was in the past through this essay or article, and then like build off of it.
Yeah, definitely. We have to, if we're going to join a conversation, we have to understand the conversation, and we have to understand where it starts, where it goes next, and where it is right now, as well as where we want it to go in the future. And just in America itself, the conversations on diversity have changed significantly. So we have to be aware of those. We have to understand the context that this was written in 2002. We have to understand the context in 2020. But we also have to understand how pedagogy, or the practices of teaching and the theories of teaching, have changed. And so we're going to start with an early conversation. Obviously, they are citing people, and so this isn't the earliest conversation, but it's a pretty basic one. By the way, and this might be interesting to some of you or not, I was telling Catherine, who's the Writing Center director at SDSU, about how we're reading this article, and I know she's mentioned Nancy Grimm several times. And first of all, I was saying it was Barron and Grimm, and Catherine said, no, it's Barron and Grimm. And I go, huh, that makes sense. And then she did her PhD at this university. Catherine did. She actually came around, she was there by the time, she was there maybe the year after this was published. So she wasn't part of this conversation upon which the article is written, but Barron and Grimm continued this work when Catherine was there, and it continues today. And Nancy Grimm has continued to write on diversity and diversity training and how to consider diversity in writing center work. I thought you all had some really interesting observations about why, like awareness of identity matters for education as well as for writing center work. And this is where we're going with the next essay. Anything you want to add to what we've already discussed?
I do have a quick question.
Yeah,
if
Derek.
possible. Do we know what month this was written in 2002?
Oh, you know what? I do not know. Yeah, we do. It was published, it wasn't written in 2002. Peer review is a really long process. This would have been submitted. and then read and reviewed and read and reviewed. So this was probably written in maybe 1999 or maybe 2000, 2001. It was published in spring, summer of 2002. Did you have a reason for asking that?
Yeah. I think if we're talking about like relevant time periods or why it was relevant that it was written in 2002, I think it makes good comparison that the article itself is good grounds for comparison, but not only the fact that it might have been edited during the post 9/11 period, where I think that tension was already naturally high, and a lot of people were um, repressing some of the feelings that they had because it was like a mourning period. And I feel like that having this essay be published and or written in a very close time period is is kind of speaking volumes to how this person or these two people were very willing to talk about um, like diversity or conflict. So
I really appreciate that comment, Derek. Yeah, historic context matters. Academia is not separate from what's happening in the world, what's happening in the country, what's happening in the streets. And so, in particular, the students at the university at that time, if part of this was written around 9/11, they would have been reeling from this. And those things are always important to remember. And Derek's right. I remember my husband and I had a friend who owned a mailboxes, et cetera, in our neighborhood in Tierra Santa, which is in San Diego. And he was from India, he's Muslim. He was he was a practicing Muslim, but he wasn't super devout. And after 9/11 and the backlash against Muslim Americans and against him in a community that had really loved him, the backlash, even in San Diego, in Tierra Santa, against this business owner who had been loved by the community, was pretty awful. And I think that would be even more so, even truer in Michigan, which is much wider than California, even back at the turn of the century. Wow, gosh, I sound ancient. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Derek. Any other comments before we move on? I want to talk a little bit about the essay that's coming up. So you're going to see Canvas right now. Mine looks a little different than yours because this is, yeah, mine looks a little different than yours. By the way, this is how I always organize prompts. I'm playing around with what it looks like on Canvas. I think last time I just gave you a PDF and said, here. And I thought, well, I can break it up with little tabs that like help you find what you need. You can get the PDF if you like to print things out. When I talk about the basics, we're actually doing two projects at the same time. And one is using a group of texts in an ongoing public discussion, identifying the context within which the discussion takes place, historical, social, intellectual, generic, political. Ours include historic, but also considering how academic conversations change over time, and how the text is chased by those contexts. So you are going to make an argument that enables you to join the conversation. So you're going to review, here's what other people have said, Here's the context in which they've said, and here's what others have said about how diversity influences literacy education. Here's what others have said. And here's how you want to join that conversation. The other department project, and this is something I am required to make you do by our department, is going to ask you to synthesize texts, to use one aspect of one text as a lens for understanding a second text. So it might be Leslie, or the Nancys say this, Barron and Grimm say this, and using that claim for this other text, we can see that this other thing, this new thing is true. And so you'll be doing both of those things in this essay. Basically, we also have this class project. This is how I'm interpreting this, is that you're examining an ongoing conversation about diversity in the Writing Center and the role of the Writing Center to work toward social change, and then joining that conversation by building an argument that reflects our current context. And our current context, quite honestly, is pretty messy. And some of those things you may want to comment on to show why this discussion is important. And some of you may decide you want to ease over our current context a little easier. And you're going to be writing for an audience of students and professors, as if this is an academic journal that's written for students. And that means that, yes, you're going to have an academic tone, but you don't have to sound like Barron and Grimm, and you don't have to sound like Teresa Tony, just a little bit like them. And we're going to talk about, like we're going to work toward what are the assumptions we are going to assume of our audience. Tony makes assumptions of her audience. She assumes that they're professors who teach writing, who want their students to succeed, who want their students to learn how to write academic writing. Barron and Grimm assume that their audience values equality, values diversity, is unsure about how to address these things, feels awkward addressing it. And in 2002, she would have been assuming that most Writing Center directors would be white, and she would not be wrong. Barron is a Chicana, she's Latinx, and but she would have really been breaking grounds in 2002. Even now, most Writing Center directors are white, and that's a whole other conversation that I think we can have, and we should have, and we can talk about that. But Barron and Grimm are breaking ground here. And so we need to think about what are the audience assumptions that we will make about our audience. This is going to be long. It's a minimum of 1,750 words, not including the heading, your title, or your works cited page. So it's going to be around, close to 7 pages without your works cited page. You're going to identify an area of focus, something that Barron and Grimm talk about. It might be productive diversity. It might be the presence of racism, because racism has not gone away. It might be this tendency to privilege whiteness, characteristics of whiteness in the academy. They talk about a lot of things. They enter into a lot of conversations in developing the lessons they learned from this. it might even be the importance of talking about why is it important to approach diversity. They talked about the importance of approaching and discussing diversity back in 2002. And some of those reasons will be similar, but perhaps you might be able to add to that. At some point, we're going to identify as a group, we're going to examine the topics that we think are worth pursuing. And at that point, you're going to choose a topic that you want to pursue, and you'll work in a group to develop an annotated bibliography. So you're sharing sources with each other in your group. These groups will be a little bit larger. Last time you had groups of 3 and 4. These groups will be anywhere from 5 to 6, because I really do want you to have the opportunity to develop an annotated bibliography that works for all of you. Andy, did you have a question?
Yeah, so we're not writing the essay together, we're just doing the bibliography together?
Yes.
Okay, got it.
And so these are supportive groups. You'll each produce your own academic journal. So there will be a series of however many groups we have. And so together we'll come up with a title for our academic journal. And together in your group, you'll probably want to have an introductory letter that sets the stage for your topic. But the grade, again, you're graded on your research article. And I think that that's the fairest way to do it. It's tough when you're doing group projects that it's tough doing group projects. My students always tell me, so-and-so didn't do anything, and that's frustrating. So I don't want your grades to depend on each other. That being said, supporting each other is really helpful, especially in this time when we don't actually get to see each other. And so some of you will end up working with some of the people from your previous groups, but I want you to choose by the topic that you're most interested in. So not next week, but the week after that, you're going to be going to the library, and then you'll be going to the library to learn how to use the research functions of the library website, and then you'll be worked together. By that time, you will have already chosen your topic. You'll already be in your groups. And you'll start collecting sources, and you'll have annotated bibliographies that will include, précis, evaluation of evidence, discussion of rhetorical strategies, analysis, because we don't leave those things behind. So, questions right now?
Yeah, I have one clarifying question. Just because you're saying bibliography a lot, and I'm realizing I don't completely know what that is.
An annotated bibliography. Bibliography is a list of books or sources, literature that you possibly could use in a research paper. An annotated bibliography consists of a citation and notes about that text. And each annotated bibliography is going to look a little different depending on the class. And I will be very, very clear about what I want in your annotated bibliography. Definitely the citation, definitely a short summary that considers the things that I want you to think about as you move forward with this research paper. So thank you for asking that, Kristen, because I think some of you have encountered annotated bibliographies already. I think Anna was in the Writing Center working on one previously. but you will encounter them as you move forward at the university. Any other questions? I've got some notes on, like why we're studying what we're studying. I do cite, I have a little context, and I do cite Barron and Grimm a few times and the New London group. And then I talk about what you'll be doing in your groups, the structure of your essay, and the types of sources that you can use. And that is the prompt. So any questions about the essay itself right now? I know you have some basic, like we've talked about the basics of this. It's due on December 5th, which is not the end of the semester, but almost the end of the semester.
I'm kind of curious about the timeline because you just mentioned it. Well, like I saw the first due date was like in a month, and it was just the introduction and didn't say like the actual rough draft was due in a month. So I don't know if there's any other parts of the timeline.
Let me go back to there were some other dates. Let me go back there. The introduction is due in a month, which is quick, but it's a rough draft of the introduction. The full rough draft is due a week after that. And the revised draft is due December 5th. And in between that, we have Thanksgiving. So I'm trying to have the rough drafts submitted before Thanksgiving so that you, sorry about the dogs. Diego? We'll see if that stopped them. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. Yeah, I'm trying to make it so that you're not putting together a rough draft during Thanksgiving, but you have time to step away from it, maybe meet with me to talk about the essay. And honestly, the introduction and the full rough draft, they're just rough drafts. You've got time to revise. If you do a good job with the annotated bibliography, that's going to help you significantly. So the research parts, that's really, really important. If you've done good research, putting together a research paper is not a terrible thing. So. Other comments or questions about the essay? So let me mention a couple of things coming up. Tonight you have your reading journal for this article. It's not, like as Amaru pointed out, you move slowly through it because it is academic writing. It still has that concise sentence structure, and it's long. But that being said, it's, as Derek pointed out, it doesn't have, so much of it is story-based that it's not a hard reading where you're stumbling over the citations. They do a really good job of integrating the citations and showing why they're relevant. I actually was super moved by the sources they cited, and it helped give me words for, like what does social change look like in an educational setting, or what is racism, because it's not just personal prejudice. And they have some really beautiful, I don't know if beautiful is the right word, but they have some really clear definitions. And so they do a lot of work defining things. So your reading journal is due tonight. Quite honestly, if it comes in tomorrow, I'm good. The link disappears tomorrow night. You do have a discussion board that's due tomorrow because I want you to talk with each other about this. I had hoped we would have more conversation about it today, but about a half of you have read it and half of you haven't. And which is fine. I'm not upset about that at all. We had plenty of things to talk about. There is another article I want you to read this week, and it's by Rebecca Jones. And the article is titled Finding the Good Argument, or Why Bother with Logic? And this one is written directly for you. It is not a hard reading, and I'm not asking you to read the whole thing, just about the first 5 pages. And if you've taken a look at it, and there is a link on Canvas, if you've taken a look at it, you go, oh, the 5 pages includes pictures. Yes, it does. And so it's not hard, and I like it. She sets the tone for what research and argumentation should be. And I want you to keep this in mind. Argumentation should not be this thing where people attack each other. And yet that's what we see a lot in our current social political context. What can I say? It's just insane. But that's not what academic argumentation should be. And so there is a reading journal for that. On Monday, when we meet again, we'll talk a little bit about Rebecca Jones. We will move straight into, we will move back to this article because I think that it's super, super important to understand Barron and Grimm. We can just call them the Nancys. That's what we called them last semester, the Nancys. And I think it's super important to understand that, since that becomes the foundation. Next week, you will have another reading that you'll do, but you'll do a reading journal, but you'll really be interacting with each other on the discussion board just to help you choose your topics for as we move forward with research. It's 11:49. I am done. I'll stick around for a little bit so that we can, if you've got questions, and then I know I have a meeting with Carlos during office hours. Did any of the rest of you book an appointment for my office hours? All right, then. It'll just be, when all of you are gone, it'll just be Carlos and me. So, all right, have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Actually, I just remembered this. I had a really quick question. It's not really related to what we're doing in class right now. It's about the writing placement assessment that we're supposed to take at the end of our junior year. Is that still a thing that's happening?
It is not. Currently,
Okay.
it's called the Writing Placement Assessment, WPA.
Yeah.
Currently, it has been suspended because we cannot all meet together in a room to take it or to grade it.
Okay.
And so, like, it's sort of good news and bad news. You don't have to take it. The bad news is you also will not be able to place out of the upper division writing class.
Okay then.
So it's kind of like, yay, you don't have to take this timed essay and pay $50 to take it. Bummer, you will be required to take the upper division writing requirement.
Okay then. Thanks, that was all.
By the way, Anna, that class is not a terrible class. And
Okay.
yeah, most people are glad they actually took the class after they take it, but nobody ever wants to take it. So
I have a quick question too, really quickly.
yeah, Annie.
So I think I emailed you about this though, but I've been like in and out of San Diego because my roommate got coronavirus. And so on Monday I was traveling, and so I wasn't able to be in class, and I'm trying to do the slide deck video. And I'm just a little bit confused with what you want us to do with the video. Would you just like us to watch that? Because sometimes there's like questions to answer, but yeah.
So Annie, I realized that anytime I create another assignment, I'm actually creating more work for myself. And so I
Okay.
figured, I know, it's like I'm working about 10-hour days right now,
Oh my gosh.
except on Saturday and Sunday when I try and only work 6 to 8 hours. And so I know
Wow.
if you're wondering why those papers are not graded, it's because of that. So anyways, I go, I don't need to make any more work. All my students are adults. If they want to watch the video and find out what we did, they can watch the video and find out what we did. And yeah, there we go.
Okay, perfect. So I should just watch the video and then that's good?
Yeah, and if it's helpful, yeah, if you watch it, you know exactly what we did that day. I don't even remember what we did on Monday. Carlos, do you? Oh, Annie, you know what we did.
Wait, from the slide deck videos, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm watching it right now. I
Oh,
was gonna
okay.
go watch it right now because I was trying to make sure if there was an assignment or not with it.
Yeah, I introduced what we were doing. Yeah, I don't remember what we did.
No worries, I can just go watch the video.
Yeah, and by the way, Monday was a tough day for me. If you have the opportunity to speed it up, take that opportunity. I feel like I was talking really slowly.
Totally. I will definitely do that if I have the opportunity. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks for asking, Annie.
Of course. Have a nice day.
And bye-bye. So, Carlos, all those assignment links have disappeared for you.
Ah, that's great.
I do want you to have an opportunity to, let me pull up Canvas.
Okay.
And that way we will be able to see what you missed. Okay.
Okay.
Because you were gone all last week. Did you submit your essay?
Yes, I did. I made sure.
Okay. All right.
I had to get out of the way to find a cafe or something with internet to submit it.
Okay, let me get to week 7.
I submitted it the last day though, Wednesday. That was with no penalty.
Yeah, and that is fine. So you have not done the identity wheel activity,
No.
which actually is short. It's easy to do. Let me click on that and open it up for you. You're getting to see what nobody gets to see.
Yay.
I know, it's not that exciting. So today is the 14th. I'm going to leave it open through the Saturday.
Thank you, because I have so many. I have another midterm due tomorrow, and I got another philosophy midterm, and it's hectic. But I'm gonna for sure do it by Saturday.
Okay. The next assignment is let me make this easier. A discussion board, a rhetorical analysis, and the reflection direction. So I'm going to make all of these due on Saturday. These are okay. And then whatever you get done, you'll get full credit. And whatever you don't get done, you won't get credit.
Seems fair to me.
Does that? Okay. Sounds good, Carlos. I'm glad you're back. I'm glad you got to spend some time with your family in Cancun.
Yeah, I would have loved it if it wasn't in the midterm week and a bunch of essays due.
Well, yeah.
circumstances.
Yeah, that's how life always is. But emergencies don't always happen in the most convenient times. So I would want my students and my colleagues to give me a break.
Yeah.
if I was encountering a family emergency. So hopefully I won't. So yeah, there's
Yeah.
that. Okay. Any other questions that you have for me, Carlos?
Not not at the moment. It was just that the missing assignments for the week. Everything else I've been trying to keep up with the grades. I had a decent grade.